Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome back to this episode of the Valley View. And once again, we have Russ Beaton to talk about sustainable economics. And Russ, we've kind of hit upon, some of the other parts of this, but I'd kind of like to get into more detail about what people can do for themselves, and maybe you could kind of go into a little bit more detail about what the community, what the local environment and people can do for themselves here without necessarily the big picture.
Right. Well, when I'm asked that kind of question, I like to remember that the three pillars of sustainability and all the work that's been done on it are generally assumed to be environment, economy, and community. And sustainability is theoretically a melding of those, so that when you think of an economic venture for your community, you don't forget the environment and you don't forget the community, the social aspects, the effects on people. Now, in my opinion, in the 25 years or so when sustainability, during which sustainability has kind of emerged, come to the forefront, we've done quite a bit of work on economy and environment. I don't think we've done a good job yet on community. For example, economy and environment, new energy sources.
Right.
That energy is endemic, as we've talked a lot about, to the economy. Well, and energy is a big environmental issue. How do we get it? Polluting or non-polluting sources, so on. So energy technologies, things like that, begin to flesh out what the combination of environment and economy look like, but doesn't say anything about community. And the questions you're asking is, what can people do in their communities?
Right.
Now, I start with one premise, and I know you share this a little bit. The top-down solutions about sustainability are not likely to come. That is, we're not going to see the federal government say, "Oh, a sustainable world would be much better than what we've got now," and then start all kinds of mandates and suggestions and guidelines and incentives and disincentives and stuff like that. Questionable how well they'd work anyway.
Well, not only that, but then you have to get people to buy into that.
Right.
So you have to make the case for why it's important, which hasn't really been done at the federal level anyway.
I'll go off the deep end here in
okay.
a radical sense, and the people who man the beltway around Washington, D.C. don't want it.
Because they're doing quite well where they are.
Because it threatens the status quo. And clearly Washington is inoculated from shaking up the status quo too much. So it's going to have to come from
the ground
communities.
Up.
Yeah, ground up. Like growing your own food. That's a literal ground up. People, how can they get involved? Well, number one, you could ask yourself, what behaviors do I really enjoy that are likely to be seriously constricted as we look ahead? And then start taking steps to either adjust the way you enjoy that act or produce for yourself, the goods that you might not be able to have or that are going to be a lot more expensive. The local food movement is a great way to get started here. Community gardens. I'm a master gardener, for instance. I really enjoy growing my own food. I'd like to do a lot more of it. I'd like to share it with people. I'd like to, suppose the neighborhood, somebody's really good at growing one crop and you're really good at growing another, and you grow enough for both of you and share it. Well, there's an example of an environmental act. It's an economic act because it's saving you money. And it's an act of community because you're working more closely with your neighbor.
Well, I can think of an example like that because my house, where I am, is very heavily shaded, the yard part of it, by the house, a small lot, and so on. So I might be better at raising things like kale and broccoli and things like that because it stays cooler much longer around my house than maybe, say, at your house where there's not so many trees and other things. Maybe you have a bigger lot so that you get more sun.
You can grow my lettuce in late summer after mine's wilted.
That's right. Or my broccoli won't bolt while yours has.
Exactly.
So those are things like even in a small little neighborhood, you could see microclimates and where things might be better for me to grow, whereas you might be able to grow tomatoes easily or something else.
And in the general sense, maybe this is an optimistic way of looking at human behavior, but if you start out with some small project, growing your own food, for instance, you're likely to become more aware of general environmental problems or general transportation problems in your community, or the whole picture of creating a more sustainable community overall. These people get involved in these little acts and their consciousness expands.
And there's lots of different, actually, since we're on food, I'll bring up another one that I used to try out, and I'm trying to rig it so I can do it here, but that was solar cookers. Instead of using an oven to cook my dinner, I would merely get a black pot, put it in a plastic bag, and have like aluminum focused on that pot up on the roof.
Like a collector almost.
Yeah, and so that it focuses the heat on that cooker, and you put it out there in the morning, and by dinner time it's ready.
Exactly.
And so that was something that I was able to do, but I need to the house that I'm living in now, I need to kind of adjust, because I have to do it on the roof. I can't do it out someplace in the yard where it would be easy for me.
Right. Well, maybe the discussion of sustainable economics leads into some recipe sharing or something.
True. Yeah, because it meets my needs, because I'm better at preparing stuff all together as opposed to preparing a bunch of things individually and then bringing them together. Because I'm horrible at making those things come together at the same time.
Let me pull together a funny little scenario here that might have relevance to a lot of people right here in Salem. I own a farm east of town. I don't live on it anymore, but on that farm I had a well. Have a well on a hill. Got a great well because the guy witched it on the hill, 100 feet elevation above the house. It's 1,400 feet running difference, and I found a solar-powered water pump. It was made in Denmark. Global economy bailed me out there. And it pumps water up into a holding tank, and then it's available down at the house. Plenty of pressure to irrigate 2 or 3 or 4 sprinklers at a time, and it's totally solar powered. And all that the cost was of installing it, the installation of the whole thing was a little under $4,000, and I have unlimited water at my house, and with absolutely no outside inputs of energy beyond the capital. Now, when I say here in Salem, one of the issues in Salem right now is how do we redevelop the north campus of the state hospital?
Right.
And I'd like to see community gardens there where we could have water that's supplied off roofs. There's 500,000 square feet of rooftops out there. We could collect the water into a pond, pump it up into a holding tank in a solar sense, and then lease out community garden plots with the water supplied.
Yeah.
And it would be cheaper for them probably to grow, to take part in a community garden. There's a lot of housing in the area. People could walk over and do their garden plot there. It would be cheaper to do that there than to pay their water bill individually at their own home. And of course, the community garden activity, you could design housing around it. You could design retirement communities. You could design recreational facilities, dog parks, whatever. The community gardens could be used as buffers of the street, and it could be quite a community. The whole site could be made an experiment demonstrating how we would build a local sustainable economy.
Well, that would be a very good project to see.
It's one I'm thinking about.
Yeah, it's not too far from my house, so I might actually get to use some of that. But what are some other examples that maybe people could do in like their day-to-day life to help, I guess, prepare them? Because, I mean, I think that this is going to come maybe sooner than some people expect.
I'm afraid it will.
And people need to realize that and start looking at what might not be sustainable in their life and what kind of changes can they make.
Well, of course, the whole movement to hybrid vehicles or electric-powered vehicles, and there are hydrogen fuel cell-powered vehicles coming along. I understand things like this. One of the things you can do is ensure that your transportation is provided to you with a lot more sustainably than it is now. Now, public transit is much more efficient quite often in areas
Right.
where it can fit, but you can't do that alone. So, you know, I'd say two things. Number one, your own purchasing habits. Buy an electric-powered car, a solar-powered. Well, solar-powered is kind of tough, but they're working on that one. And then support in your community efforts that make more sustainable services available. So, you know, you can get involved in your own life, your own purchasing habits, your own consumption habits, your own food growing habits, etc. Or you can band together with others who you feel compatible with in terms of understanding of the problem, and you can promote the kinds of general activities that you might want local government involved in.
Yeah, actually, one of the decisions I made, actually, it was quite a long time ago. It was like when I was first married. I didn't want to run two cars.
Right.
Because cars, well, I wasn't real rich, and so running two cars can become very expensive. And so what I did is and usually I had cheap cars, so they broke down a lot.
I understand.
Yeah. So one of the things I decided was that I can't live that far from where I work, because if the car breaks down, I got to be able to get there, you know, easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was I started limiting how far I would live from work. And what I decided was I have to be able to walk to work within an hour. So if I go out there in the morning and the car doesn't start, I can get to work. I might be a little bit late, but I can get to work. And so basically I decided that was about 3.5 miles, no further.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And so that was one way that I kind of dealt with it. Plus then I decided that, well, if I bike all the time, because it's not that far, 3 miles, you can do that easily within
Sure.
about 20 minutes or so on a bike. Well, gee, that's not very far at all on a bike. If the weather's, you know, decent,
Mm-hmm.
I'll do it. And so that was something that I know that kind of changed how I looked at things, because I realized that once you made that first decision, and it was a kind of a cost thing, because I just didn't see how I could do it financially.
Well, it will be, and energy analysts forever have been saying, well, to the degree that we adjust, we will be pushed that way with the marketplace, with costs.
Right.
And as an economist, I can't disagree with that.
Yeah, because before I was commuting about 25 miles or so, one way. And I just felt like, you know, if my
Right.
car doesn't start when
Oh.
I go out there, there's no way. I have to, and like the public transportation at that point, I worked in a different county. I had kind of public transportation to the edge of my county, but then I was still going to have to walk about 5 miles or
Get off and
something.
walk.
Yeah. So I just, you know, it just started pushing me in that direction to kind of think about those things when I was applying for jobs or looking at housing.
Well, you bring up a good point, and that's the need for longer-term planning. You know, you ask, what can people do to, you know, to at least insure themselves against serious problems, even if they don't, you know, philosophically feel a great desire to create a sustainable society, you know, like some of us weird people do. But your decisions, the decisions you need to make are longer term, so you need to plan ahead personally. You mentioned your housing choice. Well,
Right.
it takes a while to move and takes some planning. You mentioned your job choice. Well, that's a longer term thing too. And your transportation choice. I know when the first energy crisis hit in '73, about a 6-month to 10-month lag, and low mileage cars were the hottest thing on the market.
Right.
As people were making those decisions, once they became convinced this thing isn't just a flash in the pan, it might last. So, you know, people will make those decisions on their own, at least pushing them in the right direction, if you give them half a chance. But of course, public awareness of the problem's got to happen first. And as you say, the market, the biggest signal, hit us over the head with a hammer.
But see, if people start making those kinds of decisions, that I was talking about trying to live closer to work.
Right.
I also think it's less stressful, frankly. That was the
Absolutely.
side benefit that I found out from doing it, is that I wasn't nearly so stressed when I got to work or when I got home after work, because it was manageable. I didn't have to, oh, is that noise in the car? What is that? Or,
Right.
And sometimes traffic can be fierce,
That's right.
in commutes. And having lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, I can tell you it was pretty scary sometimes trying
Right.
to. So those are things that people can do to, I think, easily look at now. And what are some of the other things, though, that maybe people should be aware of, that maybe they just kind of put an idea in people's head that look in this direction, or, because we've talked about food and we've talked a little bit about energy and things like that.
Going back to the 3 pillars of sustainability,
Okay.
I'm a firm believer that when you get people together to talk about the ideas, you will hear ideas that you hadn't thought of, and they'll hear ideas from you they hadn't thought of. So the very act of engaging in community is a powerful stimulus to doing the right thing. And then you agree to share gardens and stuff like this, but don't make the mistake of saying, in my isolation, I've got to figure out how I'm going to protect myself and my family, and go at it like the Lone Ranger, because communities will come up with ways, ideas that you could do individually that come from others. Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Right.
This kind of thing. Plus, then, when you are talking in community, the empowerment of maybe being able to do something together, as opposed to just having to do it alone, becomes very powerful.
Yeah, well, when I kind of flashed on bomb shelters when you mentioned that. During the 50s, there were people in the neighborhood I was living in at the time that created underground bunkers, in case there was an atomic war or something like that.
Right.
But, I can't remember, somebody was saying something to the effect of, okay, so you survived, you come out, there's nobody else around. Now what are you going to do?
Now what?
And I think that makes the point about we can't do everything ourselves. We live in a society. We are basically a society-driven animal. And so we need others around to get things accomplished. We can't do everything all on our own. And I think you're making a really good point that, there are things we can do as individuals, but there's also things that we need to do as part of the community.
Right.
And like doing local community access television is an example of one thing where you can spread information to the local community about how we approach solutions and problems.
I think we're not used to coming together in communities to talk about this issue.
We always leave it to somebody else.
We'll come together and talk about a local project or
the third bridge over the Willamette.
Yeah, stuff like that. And we gave an ice cream social for our neighbors last summer, and all kinds of things ended up talking about, and it was in view of a garden. So everybody started comparing gardening stories and whatever. Come on over and see my blueberries. Come on over and do this, do that. I've got to believe that just the act of building community is one of the things that is going to be most supportive to positive ideas about converting to a sustainable system.
So getting to know your neighbors even is a big plus.
Again, it's that community as opposed to just economy and environment.
So it's kind of interesting too, because I flash on things that happened in our local neighborhood. And it's so much easier here in Salem because people seem to be outside more than what I used to see, like when I lived in California.
Interesting.
But I mean, I see more activity on the street. It's easier to talk to folks about things and establish relationships within the neighborhood.
And it doesn't really rain all that much.
Well, no. I mean, that... And it's funny, too, because I'll tell friends that are still living in California, I see the sun almost every day. Usually in the late evening or early morning, the sun's slightly below the clouds, and at least you get to see the sun. When I lived in Sacramento, I swear that you could go weeks without seeing the sun because it would be like ground fog every day.
Yeah. The ground fog.
So
I've driven through that.
I think the climate here is wonderful myself.
Well, but building community is a very important thing. One of the things I like to say is that our life goals, we really only ever have one goal, and that's a sense of community. We want to know where we belong.
In that community.
In that community. And we've got an economic system that has not only threatens to rupture our environment, it has alienated and isolated people individually. Even though the internet is a powerful tool and a lot of good comes from the knowledge that you can gain of what's happening in other areas, the image of everyone hunkered down at a console or with their mobile device tends to bother me. Maybe it's just that I'm old.
Well, you know, I saw somebody was talking about doing a study because what they observed out at restaurants were adults with children focused on their electronic device rather than their kids. And they were noticing what kind of interaction there was as the kids got more insistent on getting attention from the adults. And so it kind of brings that image up, that the fact that, like, we can't be sitting there staring at a little tiny screen when there's so much life all around us. And they also pointed out that the more focused the adult was on their electronic device, the less time they would give the kid, and then when they did, it tended to be more negative.
Which sort of a don't bother me type thing.
Or they answered it real quick and just wanted to be done with it.
Right.
And I'm sorry, that isn't the way kids work real well, because then they start acting out more.
Well,
it's been my experience anyway.
There's another experience that's even scarier, in my opinion, and that's you see the family with 6 and 8-year-old kids, and the kids have their own laptop already or their own tablet, and they're playing electronic games at dinner out in the restaurant.
Well, true. That was part of it.
You know, we're breeding the next generation and won't even have the problem you're having.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's... See, there was another lifestyle choice that I made when my kids were young, was that I decided that both my wife and I couldn't be working at the same time and have the kids in daycare all day. So I kept working a job that was nights while she was working days. Because a couple of times I got asked to, you know, if I wanted to go on the day shift for a promotion, I would say no, because then that would mean
disrupt your family.
Well,
patterns.
Yeah, and I do think that children require a lot of attention from, you know, they're one of their caregivers.
My counselor wife calls it quality time.
Yeah, and I used to tell people too, I go into work around 4 in the afternoon, people would start hitting me with all these things, and I said, look, you know, I take care of kids all day. That's real work. You know, because it's true. Kids do require a lot of attention because you want them to grow up right. And
well, sure.
And you want life to be sustainable, so you have to make sure that those kids are getting the proper messages and the proper care. And that's part of it to me.
Yep, and it all boils down to what you do in your community, you know, your own life as well as how you interact with neighbors and others.
So that's a key component of what we're talking about as far as sustainable economics. It's trying to get a sense of community back so that we can talk to our neighbors about problems or situations that need to be dealt with or thought about in advance.
Sustainable economics, following up on that point, Ken, sustainable economics has been really viewed with suspicion because, in my opinion, because it injects a humanistic, values-based set of assumptions back into the model. It says you got to worry about who you are as a person and not just what you are as an economic input, something like that. Economists are very fond, you know, the formal discipline of economics is very fond of analyzing itself, saying no value judgments, only positive economics. And positive economics is what can be proven with data or what follows directly, almost mathematically, from a set of assumptions. And when you start injecting your values in there, I think we ought to do this, I think we should do that, whatever. economists say can't make those kinds of statements.
Well,
I know economists who have testified in the legislature and have asked, well, what would you do about this? Well, I can't talk about that as an economist, they will say. I could talk about it as a citizen, but I leave my value judgments out. And I think that's been dangerous.
Yeah, because it's something they can't measure. And so if they can't measure it, they decide it's not important.
Right.
And I mean, that's my view of what
that's right.
the problem is.
If it can be measured, it isn't important. And sustainable economics, in a sense, can be referred to as a humanistic economics.
Or economics
where
as
people
if,
matter.
Well, economics as if people mattered.
The old line from E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful.
Yes.
That was the subtitle of Small is Beautiful, Economics as if People Mattered.
Yes, and I think that is something that really needs to be emphasized too, as when we talk about sustainability in economics, is that economics as if people really did matter.
Yeah, and taking jobs to China, for instance, means people don't matter. Chinese matter, maybe. But,
well, yeah, and I don't buy the argument that there's certain societies that are more equipped to do this or that, and it also kind of gets back to this specialization that we've seen in our economy, where I can only do this or I can only do that, where I don't think that's the way people really work. I think that you should have a certain amount of skills just in managing your household. And I know that I'm terrible at some things like plumbing and electronics and things like that. I can kind of get through it, but it's not something I'm particularly good at, and it's because I haven't done it. And I think people need to realize that they need to build as many skills as possible. Maybe you're not an expert at doing certain things.
If I were to design a manufacturing plant for the steady state or the sustainable state, I would have people multitasking in it so that they could do different things in the firm.
And not specialize.
Because I think they'd enjoy it more and they'd interact with others more, and they would come to think of the firm itself as a community. And
might be able to,
we don't do that now.
Yeah, and we might think of better ways to do things as a result of that. So I want to thank you, Professor, for joining us on this kind of long journey.
I've enjoyed it, Ken. Thank you.
And I want to invite our viewers to tune in next time. And thank you for watching Valley View.